Ethan had always dreamed of exploring space. As a young astronaut, he spent years training for the moment when he would leave Earth behind and venture into the unknown. His dream finally came true when he was chosen to be part of a mission to explore an uncharted planet, located far from the familiar stars. The planet, named Arcadia, was strange and silent, with vast, empty deserts and towering mountains. No signs of life had been detected, and the planet's only interest to scientists was its rich deposits of rare minerals. Ethan's shuttle landed smoothly on the surface, kicking up clouds of red dust. He stepped out of the craft, his boots making a soft thud on the rocky ground. The air was thin, but breathable, just barely enough to keep him alive. He adjusted his helmet, his eyes scanning the horizon. His mission was simple: collect samples and take readings. But Ethan's heart raced with excitement. This was the first time a human had set foot on Arcadia. After hours of exploring, Ethan came across something unexpected. Tucked away in a narrow valley, hidden beneath a mountain of stones, was a strange object. It looked like a giant stone jar, covered in ancient markings and glowing faintly. Ethan approached cautiously, his curiosity outweighing the warning signals flashing in his head. He knelt beside the relic, gently brushing away the dirt and debris that had accumulated over centuries, or perhaps millennia. The markings on the jar were unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. They were not just carvings. They seemed to move, shifting like living creatures on the surface of the stone. As he touched the jar, the glow became brighter, and the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. A soft humming noise filled the air, growing louder with every second. "Ethan," a voice whispered, soft and melodic, yet powerful enough to make his heart skip a beat. The voice wasn't coming from any speaker or communicator. It felt like it was inside his mind. Yet it was distinct and clear. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his chest. He quickly looked around, but there was no one there. He was alone on this desolate planet, or so he thought. Before he could react, the stone jar cracked open with a sudden burst of light, and from it emerged a figure that took Ethan's breath away. The figure was a woman, tall and graceful, with long, flowing hair that shimmered like stars. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her skin seemed to radiate energy. She was beautiful in a way that was impossible to describe, as if her very presence defied the laws of nature. Her features were perfectly symmetrical, as though she had been sculpted by the hands of the gods themselves. Ethan stumbled back in shock, unsure if he was dreaming. "What are you?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's smile was both kind and knowing. "I am Zora," she said, her voice like a melody. "And you, human, have set me free." Ethan's mind was racing. He had heard legends about powerful beings in the universe, but none of them seemed to match what stood before him now. The woman, or whatever she was, looked almost otherworldly. Her presence seemed to fill the air with a strange energy, making the planet itself feel alive. "I don't understand," Ethan said, still trying to process what was happening. "How are you? Alive? And why are you in that jar?" Zora's eyes sparkled as she stepped closer. "I am a Genie, a being of ancient power. I was trapped in that jar for centuries by the beings who feared me. But now you have released me, and in return, I must grant you 3 wishes." Ethan blinked, not sure if he had heard her correctly. 3 wishes? Like a genie? He asked, a bit incredulously. Zara's smile widened, but there was no hint of humor in her expression. "Yes, 3 wishes, as per the ancient laws of the cosmos. You are the one who freed me, so I must grant you whatever you desire. But beware, human, your wishes will not come without consequences." Ethan felt a strange mixture of excitement and hesitation. He had always heard stories about genies, but he never thought he would meet one. The idea of making the wish seemed so simple, yet so dangerous. He had only 3 chances to shape his future, and the weight of those choices was beginning to sink in. Zora floated effortlessly beside him, her gaze never leaving him. "Tell me your first wish," she said, her voice inviting yet laced with an undertone of warning. "But choose carefully, for the path you take will change everything." Ethan stared at her, feeling the gravity of the moment. He had always dreamed of having the power to change the world, to make a difference on a grand scale. The possibilities were endless. He could ask for wealth, power, or even immortality, like so many others before him might have. But Ethan knew that he had to make his choice wisely. After a long pause, Ethan looked up at Zara, his decision made. "I want the power to shape reality itself," he said, his voice steady. "I want to be able to change the world with just my thoughts, to make humanity's future the way it should be." Zara's expression flickered for a moment, surprise, maybe even fear, before she nodded slowly. "That is a powerful wish," she said softly. "But be warned, human, the consequences of such power are far greater than you can imagine." Ethan didn't back down. He had made his choice, and he believed that humanity could rise to the challenge. He was ready to take the first step into a future he would shape himself. Ethan stood still, his eyes locked with Zora's glowing ones. The weight of the wish he had just made was beginning to settle over him. He had asked for something incredible, something no human had ever dared to imagine. The power to shape reality itself, to control the world with his thoughts. It was a desire many people would have, but to actually say it out loud, to ask for such power, felt different. Zara's face was unreadable. She floated before him, her hands glowing softly, as if she were preparing herself for something monumental. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and Ethan felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He had no idea what was coming next, but he knew it would change everything. "You understand the consequences of your wish, human?" Zara asked, her voice soft but carrying a weight of ancient wisdom. "Reality is not something to be shaped lightly. There are forces in this universe far beyond your comprehension. Tread carefully." Ethan nodded, trying to steady his breathing. "I know, but I believe in humanity. I believe that we can handle it." Zara didn't respond right away. She simply hovered in the air, her eyes fixed on Ethan, as if trying to see into his soul. For a moment, it seemed like she was considering something, weighing the depth of his words. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Very well," she said, her voice echoing like a distant thunderclap. "I will grant your wish, but remember, it is not just a gift. It is a responsibility." With a wave of her hand, the energy around them intensified. The ground beneath Ethan's feet began to tremble, and the air shimmered with vibrant colors. Zara's form glowed brighter, her presence filling the space as if she were becoming one with the very universe. Ethan felt a rush of power surge through him, and he gasped, his eyes widening as he realized what was happening. For a brief moment, everything around him seemed to freeze. Time itself felt like it had stopped. The planet's distant mountains, the swirling winds, the soft hum of his own breathing. They were all suspended in a moment of complete stillness. Ethan closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the power he could feel inside him. "Your thoughts are now reality," Zara's voice echoed in his mind, more powerful than before. "Focus. Think. Your desires, your intentions will shape the world around you." Ethan took a deep breath and opened his eyes. The first thing he noticed was the sky. It was a deep shade of purple, not the typical blue of Earth. He focused on it, and with barely a thought, the sky changed. Clouds swirled and shifted, taking on colors he had never seen before, vivid hues of gold and red, like a sunset but much more intense. He didn't touch the air, didn't say a word. He just fought it, and the world responded. For a moment, Ethan felt like a god. The power was intoxicating. He could feel the changes he wanted to make, the desires that had always been locked away deep within him, ready to burst free. He thought about the world, about humanity's greatest problems: war, hunger, inequality. His heart raced as he imagined solutions. He didn't want to just change the weather or shift landscapes. He wanted to change the course of human history. He turned to Zara, his voice shaking with excitement. "I can do it. I can really change everything." Zara's expression remained calm, but there was something in her eyes. Concern, perhaps. Power is not as simple as it seems. You are not the only one who will notice these changes. There are those who will come to test you. Ethan's excitement faltered for a moment. "What do you mean? Who would challenge me?" Zara's gaze grew distant, as if she were seeing something far beyond this planet. "The universe does not allow such power to go unchecked. You may think you are helping, but there are forces out there who will see your changes as a threat. And once you have begun, there is no turning back." Ethan's mind raced. The weight of her words hit him hard. He had asked for the power to reshape reality, but he hadn't considered the dangers of such a wish. Would he be able to control it? Could humanity handle the responsibility of such power? And what about the consequences Zora had warned him about? Despite the growing doubts in his mind, Ethan remained firm. He had made his wish, and he wouldn't back down now. "I'll face whatever comes. Humanity deserves this chance." Zara nodded slowly, as if she knew something Ethan didn't. "Very well, but remember, your first wish has set the stage for everything that follows. Your next 2 wishes will define the future of your people." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. The weight of the words was heavy, but his resolve stayed strong. He had always believed in humanity's potential to rise above challenges, to solve problems that seemed impossible. This power wasn't just for him, it was for everyone. He couldn't afford to doubt himself now. With a final glance at Zara, Ethan turned his attention back to the world around him. He closed his eyes, letting his thoughts flow freely, imagining a better world. A world where peace, equality, and prosperity were not just dreams, but realities. As he focused on this vision, the ground beneath him began to shift once more. The planet was changing, responding to his thoughts. The air around him buzzed with energy. Ethan smiled, knowing that the first step had been taken. The world was on the edge of something incredible, something new, and he would be the one to guide humanity toward it. Ethan felt a deep sense of satisfaction as the world around him shifted. He had made his first wish, and the changes were already becoming visible. The sky was brighter, the clouds swirling in new patterns, and the very air felt charged with potential. It was as if he had unlocked something long hidden in the universe, something powerful and transformative. The changes had begun. But it wasn't just the planet that was transforming. Ethan could feel it deep within himself. The power he now held was not just about reshaping the physical world. It was about shaping humanity's future. He had asked for the ability to change reality, and he could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him. Humanity had always struggled with big problems. War, poverty, hunger, and inequality were issues that had plagued the human race for as long as anyone could remember. People had tried to fix these problems, but they were always just beyond reach. Now, Ethan had the power to solve them. All it took was a thought. He closed his eyes and pictured a world where hunger no longer existed, where no child ever went to bed without a meal. He thought of a world where clean water was available to every person, no matter where they lived. And just like that, the world began to change. Food appeared in the hands of those who needed it. Water flowed freely from fountains in the most desperate regions of the earth. People who had never known what it was like to be full or to drink from a clean source stared in wonder at the miracles happening before them. Ethan didn't stop there. He thought of peace, a world where nations no longer fought over land or resources, where war was nothing more than a distant memory. He imagined cities where people of all races, religions, and cultures lived together in harmony, working for the common good of everyone. He focused on these thoughts, and as if by magic, borders disappeared. Governments adjusted their laws to promote peace and cooperation. Old enemies became allies. At first, it felt like a dream. Ethan couldn't believe the power he held in his hands. He thought of even bigger changes. What if the entire planet could be healed? What if humanity could work together to repair the damage done to the environment? And with that thought, the air began to clear. Rivers and oceans began to heal, pollution faded away, and forests started to grow back in places where they had been destroyed. Ethan felt the power of the change sweeping over the world. But with every change, there was a part of him that hesitated. Was it right to make such sweeping changes without considering the consequences? Was he playing God with the future of humanity? Zora's warning echoed in his mind. Power is not as simple as it seems. She had told him that there were forces in the universe that would notice these changes, forces that might not see humanity's rise as a positive thing. He wasn't sure what that meant yet, but he had no time to think about it. The world was changing, and people were noticing. Across the planet, people began to wake up to the new reality. News spread quickly about the miraculous changes. Cities were no longer plagued by hunger, and people were living longer, healthier lives. The world was becoming a place of peace, and for the first time in history, there was hope for the future. In the midst of all this, Ethan's thoughts turned to the people who would be most affected by these changes, those who had lived through war, those who had known only suffering. How would they react to a world where their pain was erased? How would they respond to a future they had never imagined? He thought about his own family and friends. Would they understand what he had done? Would they accept the changes as a gift or see them as an unnatural force? As he pondered these questions, something unexpected happened. A group of people from across the globe, leaders, activists, and thinkers, began to gather in a digital space, connecting from every corner of the earth. They shared the same thoughts and feelings. Was this truly the right thing to do? Was Ethan's power something humanity could control? Could they trust one person to make decisions for all of them? Ethan watched as leaders from different countries stood together on a virtual stage, facing the camera, their expressions serious. The world was looking to them for answers. They weren't sure what to make of this new reality, but they were determined to understand it. Some were grateful, others fearful. Some asked questions, while others demanded to know who had given one man the ability to change the world. A representative from the United Nations spoke up, their voice clear and resolute. "We are witnessing a miracle, but miracles come with consequences. We cannot allow one person to hold this kind of power alone. We must ask, who is controlling this power? Who decides how to use it?" The question hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Ethan watched the broadcast, knowing the world was at a crossroads. This power had the potential to create a utopia, or it could tear everything apart if misused. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that humanity's future couldn't rest in his hands alone. Zora's voice echoed in his mind once more, this time louder, more urgent. "The universe will not let such power go unchecked. You must be prepared, Ethan. There will be challenges ahead, forces that will test your resolve." Ethan knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. As humanity awakened to the new world he had created, Ethan knew that he would need more than just power to guide them. He would need wisdom, unity, and strength, qualities that only the human race could provide together. And in the end, it would not be his power alone that would shape the future, but humanity's will to rise above and build a new world. The world had changed. There was no denying that. Ethan's wish to reshape reality had brought miracles to humanity. Hunger, war, and disease were no longer problems. People lived longer, healthier lives, and the environment was slowly healing. But with these changes, the world was also beginning to feel the weight of what had happened. People were grateful, but they were also afraid. Ethan's power was too much for one person to control. Ethan knew that the changes he had made were only the beginning. The more he used his power, the more he realized that nothing in the universe came without balance. The forces that had kept everything in harmony before, forces he had never understood, were starting to stir. Zora had warned him. She had told him that power of this magnitude would attract attention, but Ethan had thought that the changes he was making would only bring good things. What he hadn't anticipated was the fear that such power could bring, or the resistance from those who felt threatened by it. Across the world, powerful organizations and leaders who had once profited from the old systems, governments, corporations, and even military groups, began to take notice. They were not happy with how quickly things were changing. They had lost control, and they wanted it back. One evening, as Ethan was standing on the balcony of his home, looking out at the vast city skyline, his communicator beeped. It was an urgent message from the United Nations. "Ethan," the voice on the other end said, its tone serious. "We need to talk. There are groups rising up against your changes. They are calling themselves the Guardians of Order, and they believe the world you've created is unstable. They think humanity cannot handle the changes you've made. We fear it's only the beginning." Ethan's stomach tightened. He had expected some resistance, but hearing it so clearly, coming from all corners of the globe, made it real. People were afraid of the unknown, and many feared that Ethan's power would lead to chaos, not peace. He had only wanted to help, to create a better world for everyone. But now he found himself facing a world that didn't know how to cope with the changes. "What should I do?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "We need to meet," the voice from the UN said. "The Guardians are powerful. They have followers in every part of the world, and they're gaining influence. They won't stop until they see you as a threat. They want to take back control. You need to be ready." Ethan sat down heavily, his mind racing. He had never expected this kind of pushback. The Guardians were a new movement, but they were growing fast. And their message was clear. Humanity was not ready for the kind of changes Ethan had brought. They believed that power like his, given to one person, would only lead to disaster. As Ethan prepared to meet with the UN representatives, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on. The Guardians weren't just angry, they were organized. Their influence was spreading like wildfire. And it wasn't just the ordinary people who were afraid. Powerful governments, military leaders, and even major corporations seemed to be backing them. They saw Ethan's power as a threat to their own control. They didn't trust someone with the ability to change the world on a whim. The next day, Ethan attended a global summit that brought together leaders from every corner of the world. The atmosphere was tense, and many eyes were on him. Some people were still hopeful, still grateful for the changes he had brought. But others were skeptical, their faces lined with worry. He stood before them, his heart pounding. "I know that what I have done has been drastic," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I truly believe that these changes are for the good of humanity. We no longer need to fight each other for resources. We no longer need to live in fear of hunger or disease. We have a chance to create something new, something better. But I can't do it alone. I need your help." The room fell silent. Some leaders nodded, while others looked away, their expressions unreadable. Then, a man rose from the back of the room. He was tall, with a stern face and eyes that burned with intensity. He was the leader of the Guardians of Order, a man named Victor Rowe. "You don't understand, Ethan," Victor said, his voice calm but firm. "You think you've made the world better, but what you've done is destabilize it. No one person should have the power to change everything. You've taken away choice from the people. You've turned humanity into something it was never meant to be, dependent on one man's will." Ethan's chest tightened. "I've only given people what they've needed for so long. Freedom from suffering. Freedom to live without fear." Victor's eyes narrowed. "And in doing so, you've taken away the most important thing of all. Freedom of choice. We can't live in a world where one person has all the power to decide what's best for everyone. You may think you're helping, but you're playing with forces you don't fully understand." The tension in the room thickened, and Ethan could feel the weight of Victor's words pressing down on him. Had he made a mistake? Had he taken too much power into his own hands? But no, he couldn't believe that. The world was better. People were better. Wasn't that proof enough? Victor's voice grew louder. "We will not stand by and let one man control the fate of billions. There are other ways to solve humanity's problems, ways that don't involve one person holding all the power, and we will stop you if we have to." The room erupted into chaos. Some leaders cheered, while others shouted for calm. Ethan felt his heart race, but he kept his composure. He had to remain focused. This was not the end. It was just another beginning. And he would need all his strength, all his power, to face the challenges ahead. The days after the global summit felt heavy, like a storm was brewing on the horizon. Ethan's thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and fear. The Guardians of Order had made their position clear. They saw him as a threat. They wanted him to stop using his power, to give up the ability to change the world at will. But Ethan knew he couldn't stop. Not now, not when humanity was finally on the edge of a better future. The meetings with world leaders had not gone well. Some continued to support him, praising the miraculous changes he had made. But others, led by Victor Rowe and his guardians, were growing more powerful every day. They were determined to stop him, to take back control from the one person they saw as dangerous. Ethan stood at the edge of a large balcony overlooking the city, the cool wind tugging at his hair. He could see the people below, living their lives in a world that was now free of hunger and war. But even in this peaceful world, there were whispers of fear, whispers of doubt. Ethan had heard rumors that some were starting to rebel, protesting the changes he had made. They were afraid of what might come next. They didn't trust someone who could change everything with a thought. Zara had warned him about this. She had told him that the universe would not allow such power to go unchecked. And she was right. The more Ethan used his power, the more the world shifted. But the more it shifted, the more resistance grew. And now he had reached a crossroads. He couldn't keep going down this path without consequences. He had to make a choice. It was late in the evening when the message came. A hologram appeared in front of him, the familiar face of the United Nations representative flickering in the air. "Ethan," the voice said, urgent and serious, "we need you here now. The Guardians have taken control of a major city. They're spreading their message faster than we can keep up. They're demanding that you stop using your power. They want to impose martial law." Ethan felt his heart race. How bad is it? The city is in chaos. People are protesting in the streets, fighting for control. We're losing our grip on the situation. If you don't act now, this will spread to other cities. Ethan's mind whirled. He had known it would come to this, but hearing it made it real. The peaceful world he had created was on the brink of destruction. All it had taken was one group, one movement, to stir up fear. And now, it felt like everything was slipping away from him. "I'll be there," Ethan said, his voice tight. "I'll do what I can." Within hours, Ethan was on a private jet, heading toward the heart of the city where the Guardians had begun their protest. As the plane descended, he could see the streets below, packed with people shouting, waving signs, and demanding change. It was no longer just a protest, it was a rebellion. The authorities were doing their best to control the situation, but it was clear they were losing. People who had once supported the changes Ethan had made were now questioning whether it was right for one person to control so much power. The Guardians had spread fear, and that fear had spread faster than Ethan could have imagined. When Ethan landed, he was met by a small group of United Nations representatives. They didn't speak much, their faces grim, as they led him to a safe house in the city. He could feel the tension in the air, the fear, the anger, the uncertainty. And then, just as they were about to enter the building, he heard the loud sound of a crowd chanting outside. Their voices were deafening, filled with fury and frustration. "Ethan," they shouted, "no more. You've taken too much. Stop the power." Ethan stood still for a moment, listening to the cries. The people were angry, yes, but they were also scared. They didn't understand what was happening. They didn't understand the power he held. He had wanted to help them, to give them a better world. But now, it seemed as if the world was turning against him. He took a deep breath, and turned to the group of representatives. "I need to speak to them." "You can't," one of the representatives said quickly. "It's too dangerous. The Guardians have people everywhere. They'll never let you get close." But Ethan was determined. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. He couldn't hide behind walls anymore. If he truly believed in the future of humanity, he had to stand in front of them, show them the truth, and ask them to decide their fate. "I'll take my chances," he said, stepping forward. "I'll show them who I am and what I stand for." He walked out into the streets, and as he did, the crowd's anger began to grow. People shouted at him, some throwing objects. The Guardians were leading the charge, their voices ringing out above the chaos. Victor Rowe's face appeared in front of Ethan, his expression cold. "You've come to face us, Ethan," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. Ethan stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I've done everything I can to help humanity. I wanted to give you all a chance to live without fear, but I can't do it alone. I can't make these decisions for you. It's up to you now." The crowd quieted for a moment. Ethan's words seemed to hang in the air, like a thread connecting him to everyone around him. Would they listen? Would they accept that the future was in their hands? Or would they let fear take control? He stood there, waiting, knowing that the choice of humanity was about to unfold. Would they accept the world he had created, or would they choose to fight for a different future? The streets were still filled with people, but the angry shouts had softened. For the first time since the Guardians had risen, Ethan could feel a shift. It wasn't the loud cheers he had hoped for, but it wasn't the violent rejection he had feared either. People were thinking, asking questions, and slowly the fear began to fade. Victor Rowe stood in front of Ethan, his face still hard and defiant. But even he couldn't ignore the change in the crowd. They were no longer united against him. Something had clicked in their minds, and the once unified Guardians were beginning to fracture. "I told you," Victor said, his voice cold. "You've convinced them with your empty words. But don't think this is over." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He knew that Victor would never see things the way he did. Some people would never be able to accept a world where one person could wield such power, and Ethan knew that he couldn't change that with words alone. But what mattered now was what came next, the choice of humanity. The people were beginning to understand that Ethan's power wasn't about control. It was about potential. He had given them the chance to build something new, something better. Now it was up to them to decide if they would rise to that challenge. As the murmurs in the crowd grew louder, one voice broke through. It was the woman who had spoken before, her face filled with emotion. "Ethan," she called out, stepping forward, "we don't want to fight anymore. We don't want war or hunger or fear. We want to believe that we can have a future without all of that." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. They weren't just asking for a world without suffering. They were asking for a future where humanity could thrive together. "We all want that," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've done what I can to create a world where that's possible, but I can't do it alone. I need all of you. We all have to work together, no matter how hard it might seem. This is our world now, and it's up to us to shape it." The crowd's response wasn't immediate. People looked at each other, exchanging glances. Ethan could see the hesitation in their eyes. They were still afraid, still unsure. But the hope was there too. It was small, like a seed, but it was beginning to grow. Victor stepped forward again, raising his voice. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ethan. You think you can change the world with a wave of your hand, but the universe doesn't work like that. There will always be a price." Ethan met Victor's gaze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what was being said hung in the air. The truth was, Victor was right. There was always a price to pay. Ethan had learned it the hard way. But the question wasn't whether there was a price. It was whether humanity was willing to pay it. I know the risks, Ethan said quietly, his voice carrying across the crowd. But I also know the rewards. We've already seen what's possible when we come together, when we put aside our differences. We've shown that we can change. We can make this world better, for everyone. There was a pause, and then slowly, the crowd began to murmur in agreement. It wasn't unanimous, and it wasn't without resistance. But the seeds of change had been planted, and they were beginning to take root. The next few hours were crucial. Ethan continued to speak with the people, addressing their fears and their hopes. He told them that he wasn't their leader, he was just a catalyst. The power to create the future was in their hands. He could guide them, but they had to walk the path themselves. He promised that there would be challenges ahead, but with unity, there would be nothing they couldn't overcome. Meanwhile, the Guardians continued to rally, but their strength was fading. As the crowd began to listen to Ethan, they realized that they had been manipulated by fear. The world they had been promised by Victor and his followers was one of control, of resistance to change. But the world that Ethan had shown them was different. It was a world of hope, of progress, of opportunity. Victor saw the shift happening, and his anger flared. "You think you've won, don't you?" He spat, his face twisted with fury. "You think they'll follow you into this dream of yours. But I won't let it happen." Ethan stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "It's not my dream, Victor. It's our dream. We all have a part to play. You can keep fighting if you want, but it won't change what's already begun." Victor's eyes flashed with fury, but there was something else there too. Uncertainty. He knew that he had lost the people. The Guardians no longer had the influence they once did. Without another word, Victor turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing amidst the crowd. The tension that had gripped the city was slowly fading, and in its place was a new sense of possibility. The crowd began to cheer, but it wasn't a cheer of victory. It was a cheer of unity. They were no longer fighting against each other. They were fighting for a future they could build together. Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but the real work was just beginning. Now he had to help guide humanity as they shaped this new world, and he couldn't do it alone. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a sense of hope that had been missing for so long. As the sun began to set over the city, Ethan stood tall, knowing that the choice had been made. Humanity had chosen. They had chosen hope, and together they would build a new world, one where no one would ever have to live in fear again. The streets were filled with chaos. Ethan stood at the center of it, surrounded by shouting crowds, angry voices demanding that he step down and give up his power. The Guardians of Order led the charge, their leader, Victor Rowe, standing tall at the front, eyes locked onto Ethan with a mixture of defiance and determination. The tension in the air was thick, and for the first time since he had gained his incredible abilities, Ethan felt truly uncertain. He had hoped that by showing the people what he had done for the world, how he had erased hunger, ended wars, and healed the environment, they would understand. But all he saw was fear. Fear of someone having so much control over the future. Fear of the unknown. "Ethan," Victor's voice rang out, cutting through the crowd. "You have no right to decide the fate of humanity. You've taken away our freedom, our choice. We will not bow to you." The words hit Ethan like a slap. He had never meant to take away anyone's freedom. He had only wanted to make the world a better place. But now, it seemed that his actions had created a different reality, one where the people felt controlled by his power instead of empowered. The crowd was growing more restless. Some shouted in agreement with Victor, while others looked conflicted, unsure of what to believe. The divide between those who supported Ethan and those who saw him as a threat was becoming clearer. Ethan knew that he couldn't stand there forever, waiting for a solution to fall into his lap. He had to act. "I didn't come here to take control," Ethan called out, his voice steady but firm. "I came here to help, to make the world a place where we no longer have to fear suffering. I gave you a future free from hunger, free from war, But I can't make these decisions alone. I need your help. This power is not mine to wield by myself." The crowd grew quieter for a moment, the angry shouts replaced by murmurs. Ethan's words hung in the air. He could feel the weight of what he was asking. He was asking them to trust him again, to believe that his intentions were pure. But trust, once broken, was hard to restore. Victor raised a hand, silencing the crowd. He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You've created a world that's too perfect. People aren't meant to live in a world without struggle, without hardship. It's the struggle that makes us human. You've stolen that from us, Ethan. And now we have to fight back to regain what you've taken." Ethan clenched his fists, but he didn't back down. He knew Victor was speaking to the fear of many people. The fear that they had lost something essential to their humanity. But Ethan also knew that there was more to the story than just fear. There was hope, too. "I haven't stolen anything," Ethan said, his voice rising above the noise. "I've given you the chance to create a better future. A world where we don't have to fight for every meal, where children grow up with the hope of a brighter tomorrow. A world where we can focus on the things that truly matter. Love, compassion, discovery. You have the power to build this world with me. Together." There was a long silence. The people in the streets seemed to hesitate, torn between the life they had known and the possibility of a new world. Ethan could see that not all of them were as angry as Victor and the Guardians. Some were thinking, questioning, unsure of what to believe. Ethan's heart ached as he realized that the battle he was facing wasn't just a physical one. It was a battle for the hearts and minds of humanity.